head doesn't look like one, really.
Okay, and we're live.
We're live. Your Western species out there, you think it is? Yeah.
Good afternoon. Let me call to order the Ways and Means Committee meeting for May 26th. First order of business is approval of the minutes from the April 28th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, corrections, comments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Citizens' comments. Since we have no citizens here, we will skip that portion. We have no old business, so let's move to new business. First item on the agenda is consideration and recommendation to Town Council for the approval of a contract renewal with All South Consulting Engineers. Brian, I think you'll handle this one in terms of background.
Okay, good afternoon. With hurricane season upon us, it's important for us to get these contracts sorted out and ready to implement when needed. And being that Kiowa is not immune to hurricanes, as we've seen in the recent years, we do have a contract with a debris monitoring company that will come in when requested to monitor the debris removal. And this is what gives us our certification for FEMA reimbursement to make sure that everything is accounted for in the removal process. So we have a contract in place currently with All South Consulting Engineers. They are out of Louisiana, and while we have not used them yet, they are still very important for us to have when that time, if and when that time does come that we need to activate their services. So what we are requesting is that we enter into their extension of the contract for their debris monitoring services, and also implement their new pricing schedule. Well, a secondary pricing schedule for a smaller event. So this is going to be a little bit different staffing that they would send down to us for a smaller, like Dorian style event. While we did see a lot of debris on the ground, it was a relatively smaller event, being that it was just vegetative and there was no beach, what we call C&D, construction and demolition. And after discussing with them about what that looked like, they said that that was a smaller event, and so they were able to give me a secondary pricing schedule of what that would look like, so that they don't have to bring in the whole crew as they would with a major storm event. And so with that pricing schedule, it would be just a backup. We would determine whether we need to use the full activation or the secondary pricing schedule. So town staff is requesting that the Ways and Means Committee recommend to Town Council the approval of this extension of their contract for the debris monitoring services, and also to implement and have the secondary pricing schedule for us to use for smaller events. There is no immediate change to the budget or financial data, as this contract is an as-needed contract, but it does give us the opportunity to have potentially a smaller staff, and therefore smaller pricing for when we do have to activate them.
Any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion to recommend approval to Town Council for the contract renewal with All South Consulting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Second item on the agenda is consideration and recommendation to Town Council for approval of the 2021 state ATAX funding amounts. Let me start on that discussion. You should see on the monitor in front of you what the recommended numbers are from the SATEX committee. That would be the second column from the left, from the right. They're recommending a total of $730,000. You'll notice that we had a discussion last month that we have a projected shortfall for the current year. And the way that's been handled within the committee and what is being recommended to this group is that in the budget we have held back amount equal to or slightly greater than what we think the funding shortfall will be this year. On this sheet, we show it as $240,000. We understand that the resort will not be spending all of their money. They intend to return or not take roughly $107,000 of their current year funding. Freshfields likewise, although they have not given us a number. So we have set aside, I believe, $160,000, which should be more than enough to make up for the shortfall we got in the current year. That leaves us with a projected number of $730,000 next year. And that is a projection. So what we've learned in this process is that we have been awarding money prior to actually collecting the funds. So a discussion was had at the SATAX committee that we would translate these dollar figures into a percentage. So each of these $6 figures would be translated into a percentage of $730,000 as the denominator. And the recipients would receive monies up to those percentages, up to the amount awarded, so that no one would be receiving more money than what's been awarded. Any excess at the end of the year would be put into next year's funding budget and would be distributed at that time under the same determination. There's one asterisk here that I would point out, and that is the Pga Golfers Association. That's been a 3-year commitment. This is year 3, and there has been a request that that $120,000 not be subject to that same issue. It's certainly up to this committee if you are comfortable with that. Just as a point of reference for math, the percentages going down that chart from top to bottom, line 1 through 6, is 1.56%, 4.4%, 45.5%, 16.44%, that's the PGA, 6.63%, and 25.48%. In the meeting today, we can certainly approve that change if we so want and recommend to town council. I would like to have that as a policy change for consideration in front of this committee next month, so that going forward we avoid the risk of going into arrears and actually distribute the money that we haven't collected. But we can deal with that a month from now. Did I miss anything, Stephanie? Okay. Are there any comments first about the funding mechanism, the potential of translating it into percentages, before we get into the specific recommendations from the state tax committee?
I think that makes great sense.
Is there a reason why the percentages aren't on the recommendations here?
And I worked them out this morning.
Okay. For the next meeting, could we add them?
Sure.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Next, let's talk about the actual funding recommendations. You'll see the third column from the right is what the request was, and then the committee chose the following numbers that are in the column to its immediate right. It is subject to approval of this committee and ultimately to the town council. So if anyone has any comments they would like to make, questions they have about how the committee thought through their issues, please raise it now.
Just a couple I mean, I'm assuming in the case of Freshfields, the event piece, that's down just because they probably are gonna lose their summer events. That normally, that money has funded their music in the park on Fridays and so on, so is this reflecting that they just probably?
They expressed comfort that they didn't need the entire amount, but they would have preferred slightly more than they got. But yes, it is reflected that they will not be doing as much, certainly in the first quarter of the fiscal year.
And just as clarification, that funding is not funding the event, but funding the
The advertisement. The promotion.
So because they're canceling the event, there's no need to use the money for promoting that.
I think the theory of the committee was that they tried to get as close to last year's actual funding amount as they could.
And the only other thing here is just an observation, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, what really impacts the county, because I think we all agree that we would like to see, like every other community where businesses and, have been really hit, that we would like to see those support it as best we can. But it needs to be seen here that the town, in that we have traditionally taken a significant amount of funding from this to be able to fund the beach patrol and the deputies, which are directly supporting tourism-related activities. Percentage-wise, we are taking the big hit.
We are.
Um,
And we took it on, we took it on our request.
Yeah, the important number for the rest of the council here is not to compare the application request to the funding recommendations, but compare 2019-20 funding amount to this year's funding, and we'll see, Freshfields took a $6,000 decrease, but you look at the town, we took a.
We took 50%,
a 50
slightly-
beach
slightly
patrol,
more.
and we took $200,000 hit on county sheriff. So the town is really taking a beating on this. And I'm saying I disagree with it, but.
Well, there's no running away from it. We went in at half of what we had gone in for last year, and they shaved it ever so slightly from there.
Understand.
Okay, anyone else with comments? Okay, do I do this in two different motions, one for the conversion to percentage, or can I do it all in one? Okay, therefore, I'm gonna make a motion that we approve the amounts for recommendation to town council, and that we convert those amounts into percentages consistent with the explanation I gave a few moments ago. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Are there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Item C, consideration and recommendation to town council for approval of the Kiowa Island Parkway landscape project. I believe you're gonna
Yeah,
say
I'm just
some
gonna
words on
start
that.
it. Jim may have to wrap it up because he might have more detail than I. Oh, so, you have the cover letter sheet that I included in your packet, and, at town council meetings, this topic has been discussed. This is the proposed landscape project on the parkway, starting at the roundabout and ending before the front gate. Also, what you've seen a number of times, at your request is that this project has been split into 4 sections. Section 1 starting at the roundabout and ending in section 4 by the front gate. So what we're here today is to get a recommendation and approve the council to move forward with this project and to award this bid to the lowest bidder, which is Artiques, that's not right, Artiques Landscape. They came in with the lowest bid at $612,000.
616.
My glasses on, I don't have it. You guys have that information, I just didn't open up, I'm sorry.
616, 76.
Yeah, so they came in at the lowest bid, and so we would like to recommend moving forward, and selecting them and make this recommendation to town council. The other question that we would like, guidance and discussion on, that you guys had at the last meeting had to do with moving forward by sections. So, let me back up a little bit. When we first started talking about the project, we were at about $750,000
Right.
proposed budget, which was not approved yet. And because of some, revisiting of the project and concern about the cost, the committee, which, was the, representative from Pga, the town, a representative from the environmental committee, and ARB, and we had someone from the resort that did take a look at the project, felt like we could get the cost down some. So in the budget that you all will discuss, in the proposed fiscal year 21 budget that you will discuss, we put a placeholder of $500,000 in there. And talking with OSD, our consultants, we feel like we can get probably under that amount, with making some modifications to the sections. And so that amount includes all 4 sections, but section 1, which is a roundabout, it only includes doing the 4 islands, doing some thinning of the roundabout, and not doing any work behind the sign, which we found out is not even our property. It still includes some work in 2, 3, and 4, and I believe they include all the work in 2, 3, and 4. But I would like to point out, for section 2, part of the work that it includes right now is not on our property. When we added the right turn lane into the Andelin tract, the resort's property, that ate up all of our right of way. So when the bike path is realigned, it basically goes right up to our right of way. So in order to do any landscaping on that property, you either have to get a landscape easement agreement or get a deed, a 10-foot, right of way, from the resort to do any, landscaping. Normally what happens is we pulled out a lot of trees out of our right of way, and you go back and mitigate, you put back in what you replaced, but unfortunately we don't have the land right now to put back in what we replaced. But section 2 includes doing work there, plus the geogrid, which we would wanna go and do sod, where the geogrid is going in section 2, and then 3 and 4 would be as presented. So in my proposal is why I put, up to, but not to exceed 500,000, is that we're still wanting to be able to work through with OSD and our TEEGs, depending on what is approved and recommend, what actually goes in those sections, or if one section is going to be eliminated, we'll have to talk about what we put there, or modified what we put there. Jim, was there anything that you'd like to add to the discussion for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Can you hear? I'm sure you can hear, but
Yeah.
probably official, just so that I can make sure she picks up.
no, I think you covered it really well. I think that, you know, we've had some internal discussions about how do we get the cost down, and, you know, the number of 500,000, which is what's in there now. If we effectively do sections 2, 3, and 4, we'd actually remove, the idea would be to remove, we had about 10,000 in there for a pathway up at the parking area by the bridge, and we would take that out. And if we do that, section 2, 3, and 4, removing that, we're at like 465-ish. And then the idea would be either just do that, or ideally, as Stephanie said, we take that extra 35-ish, and clean up the roundabout and plant the 4 islands as you approach the roundabout that currently don't look very well. So we're confident we can, you know, with approval, we can move forward and get most everything done for 500,000 or slightly under.
Have we
I have
talked to
questions.
the-
Go ahead, Mayor.
Have we talked to the county about whether, any of the re-landscaping around the new lanes can be paid for out of the funds that the county provided for the lane?
I have put in inquiry, I don't have an answer at this time.
Where was the $250,000 removed from?
Well, we've only removed, so the total bid was 616, and so we've dropped about 116,000.
Okay, where is
10
that?
of that was the path, up by the parking area, and then the remainder of it was for the roundabout section landscaping, to re-landscape that whole entire area. Then it comes a little bit on the parkway. So we basically would not be doing area 1, except for a few little pockets that would be about 30. So we've effectively eliminated most of the work in 1, and have scaled that way back.
And that's the first thing that people see when they drive up. And the feeling is that's not as important as 2, 3, and 4.
I think that based on feedback from the council, if, you know, that kind of the consensus seemed to be that 2, 3, and 4 needed the most work, particularly 3 and 4. And so to drop $100,000+, we had to pick one area to take from. And 1 seemed to be the one that most people were comfortable with in its current state.
Yeah, I should chime in. I felt strongly that Area 1, which is the circle if you approach it now, looks fine, is not inconsistent with Kiowa. We probably could save some money in the long term by re-landscaping it, but to spend that amount of money for that, it looks terrific. Whereas Area 2 and Area 3 do not represent what we'd like Kiowa to look like, and redoing it, well, first of all, we're gonna have to do a lot of 2 anyway after the construction. And Area 3, which is the curve, needs it as well. That just has not worked out well. So I strongly think this is a better solution at less money. So I think the re-engineering, and if we can carve a $30,000 or something like that out to hit the little islands, that'll be great. I really, I think this is the right direction to go, and I think we do need to keep it down at 500 or under.
Other comments or questions on this?
I guess I just want to make it clear that I don't agree with that.
Okay.
And as a result, I can't support this effort.
Well, we're gonna take this in 2 steps, so let's
Okay.
see if we can agree on step 1, which
Sure.
would be to award the contract to RT for a
Okay,
price not to exceed $500,000. And then I would like to have a debate on all 4 sections
okay,
individually, so we can discuss all 4 sections. And then, so it's a 2-step process. But the first is, I understand from our procurement policy, we have to approve or recommend approval for a contract not to exceed, in this case, $500,000 to RTs. So can I get a motion for that as step 1?
So moved.
Any discussion on that step 1 motion?
Just a question, in the selection of them, is it predominantly driven by the fact that they're a low bidder? Is it also driven by other things in their contract quality of work? What are there distinguishing issues with them other than the?
I think so, Mrs. Jameson, I'll let you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we did an interview with RTX as well as the Greenery. We felt both those companies were qualified to perform the work. You know, it's not complicated work. The most complex part is getting the quantity of plants and the appropriate plants. What we didn't want to have happen, you know, and we're not worried about this, but, you know, we were initially, is that, you know, you put in all these native plants and there might be, you know, 50,000 native grasses, and then you get a contractor and they start subbing things in, which happens a lot. So one thing we really liked about RT's is that as soon as they get approval, they're going to contract grow all of these native plants. So that means they'll basically pay a grower to grow the exact plant. We will be able to go during the growing process and inspect the plants, make sure they're the right plants, they're healthy plants, they look good before they go in the ground. The Greenery said they could get all the plants, but we were honestly a little bit skeptical that we might end up with substitution issues. But there was nothing, you know, RT's is a reputable company, they can get the plants, they can do the work, they're local, we have no issues with them at all.
OSD was comfortable with RT?
OSD has worked with them on a number of projects, spoke very highly of them.
is the irrigation system included in this bid? And how is that, what are they gonna do with that?
Yeah, so, they will basically, so all the plants that go in will have drip irrigation. So obviously they've gotta run the drip lines, but they've also gotta repair all of the irrigation infrastructure from the roundabout all the way to the gate. And so that's included in that. The Greenery, you know, as our maintenance contractor, they are more familiar with what's out there now. And they have said, as well they should be, that they will be, you know, they will assist RT's in locating the appropriate things that need to be fixed and basically help out in that process. So it should
And
be
would that include the roundabout, the irrigation system?
Not 100% sure on that.
Okay,
But they will, I mean, there is existing irrigation there now that is working. And so if we're only installing a very small number of plants, then there won't have to be much new drip line run. So my guess is, yeah, the irrigation for one will be adequate for what is there, but it wouldn't be the same irrigation that would go in if we were re-landscaping the entire thing, if that makes sense. So we'll still be able to water the grass just like we are now,
And any monies that Artiques has to pay, the greenery comes out of the $500,000 or whatever we end up awarding, is that correct?
Yeah, they shouldn't be, I mean, Artique should be doing all the work, the greenery should just be providing technical assistance.
So does that mean then, in the future, we'd have to add irrigation to the roundabout?
If we were to go forward with the full original plan for the roundabout, then we would have to add drip irrigation. But it wouldn't be a major expense to add. That's pretty cheap to put that stuff in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hearing no more debate, can we have a vote, all in favor of the step one approval or recommendation to approve Artiques to town council for a contract not to exceed $500,000? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The second phase of this is let's discuss as a group each of the four individual sections. I'm going to start from the back forward because I leave the island and that's how I view it in my own mind. That's section 4. Section 4, as my notes indicate, would have a price of just about $98,500. So, anyone have any comments about doing section 4 as specified for roughly $98,500? Hearing none, I'll simply make a comment. I think section 4 is mandatory. I think section 4 is critical. So, all in favor, or can I get a motion to approve section 4 as
So moved.
specified?
So moved.
Second.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Section 3 runs from Mingo Point, just past the bridge, for a price not to exceed roughly $97,000. The exact numbers are in your packet. Is there a motion to approve that as specified?
So moved.
Any comments regarding section 3?
This needs to be done.
Yeah, I think
It's
section
the
3.
worst, it's the worst section.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Section 2 runs from just past the bridge to just before the entrance to fresh fields that exist today. This is the largest segment. It has a not-to-exceed price of roughly $281,000. And this is a section or a segment that does have some issues based on the fact that we are losing what we thought were going to be areas for landscaping. Do we have an estimate as to what the price of that section is that will not be part of the 281?
We don't. I mean, I guess we're still hopeful that we end up, I mean, the area needs to be landscaped, you know, where the new turn lane has gone in. So I think it's a matter of, you know, how that gets funded and if the resort grants us the easement or, you know, potentially in a perfect world, the resort would pay for the landscaping in that section since it's on the property. So I think, you know, there's still some details that need to be worked out as we move forward. You know, but I think we can safely say that the price won't go, I mean, the price isn't gonna go above what's in there, but it will likely go down, obviously, if areas get removed or we're not putting in material.
In order to have further debate, do I have a motion to approve the $281,000 not to exceed price for segment 2?
It's moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any comments on segment 2?
I mean, if we're gonna take this one sort of all or nothing, I guess that's where I have an issue. I don't think that this section, if we have to sacrifice anywhere to try to get our $300,000 or $500,000 target or whatever, I still think there are opportunities here. This is not a section in my mind that, you know, looks just like I think Dan said, the roundabout doesn't, you know, inside the circle doesn't look bad. I don't know that this does either. We clearly have to do cleanup, from the addition of the lanes. I would hope that we could find financing, in a different place as part of that project. But, you know, for the most part, I'm not dissatisfied with section 2, and so I'm open. I guess this would be a great opportunity for us to go back and do some value engineering with the contractor and maybe relook at
I agree with that. I would prefer to see section 2 cleaned up, sodded, and then let's see where we are midway through this year, coming year, to see if we want to add extra landscaping or funds to do more landscaping on it. To me, and I said this last meeting, if it were my money, I wouldn't spend it on landscaping section 2. I would spend it on making sure we have fresh sod, the irrigation systems in good working order. But I wouldn't add all of the landscaping or the plants in a section that I think you drive through today, not today, but prior to the construction, that look perfectly lush and beautiful to me.
You know, we also might learn from 3 and 4. I mean, it might be one of those where we do 3 and 4 and we go, wow, that really made such an improvement in the whole thing. It really did the trick. Or we may see 3 or 4 and when they add in the plants and do the landscaping, we go,
We want to do that.
we wish we had the continuity of that going the whole way.
I'd also
But
like,
I have
I'd like
the
to,
sense that we might be smarter about that section after the others have been done, but.
and I'd like to sit, because we're gonna have a budget discussion next, and just because we have a placeholder in the budget doesn't mean we have to spend it. I don't think we're acting the same way as my 18-year-old kid used to. Just because he had money in his pocket, he spent it. I would like to postpone this one until later in the year after we've seen the work that we've seen and whether or not we want to do more enhancement to it.
Okay, if I could just point out one thing, so as I said, the majority of these plants are gonna be contract grown. So we've gotta tell the contractor, now, as soon as this gets approved, to put the money down to get these plants grown, right? And so those plants are gonna be grown during the summer. They'll be doing some prep work, but these plants will probably not go in the ground until August or September. And so, I guess what I'm saying is, if you say, okay, we're only doing 3 and 4, he grows all those plants, we put them in August, September, you're not gonna have time to then go back to the contractor and say, okay, we wanna do section 2, because he can't grow those plants and get them.
Until the following spring, summer.
Correct.
Okay.
And so, and the other thing is that, right, we're trying to, we're leading up to the PGA, we want the landscaping to look its absolute best come May of next year.
Right.
And so that's why we need to get plants in the ground in the fall, late summer, early fall. They have a little bit of time to grow, establish themselves, and then next spring when it warms up, they'll be looking really good for the PGA. So
What's
if you
the,
want to put it in the ground for the PGA,
It's
you
gotta
need
go
to
in
put
there.
it in the ground this fall.
Right.
what's the difference in, potential cost for that section that we're talking about between doing it as laid down here versus, say, what Chris suggests, puts out down irrigation and so on, but don't do anything else? So there'd be a difference between those two amounts. I guess that'd be my first question. And secondly, if we go the minimalist approach now and then decide later on, whoops, sections 3 and 4 do look really nice and we do want the continuity, and we do it then, what incremental cost that we would have not otherwise incurred will we incur because now we got to get the contractor back and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's
I mean,
hard to
best
put
guess.
a dollar amount on that, but certainly it's going to be, a good bit more expensive.
The plantings in that area, if I'm trying to remember, it's been a while now, were primarily, were they more grasses or were they more, didn't we have that area a lot more trees, a lot more palmettos and stuff going in there?
We did, and I don't see the sections up here, but that area also had a fair amount of thinning into the
Thinning out,
forest as
thinning
well,
out.
which isn't that costly, but that was a big part of the idea for that area, is kind of open up the woods and then make it feel like the woods are kind of coming towards the road a little bit. And so I think that
But if that's a big part of the project, that's stuff that's not really driven by the DEP growing.
well, that's true. I don't
Right.
think that's a big cost, but I mean, I guess what I would say is, again, we need to know now how many plants we're putting in the ground. And if you want us to go back at 2 and say, okay, we're putting in a lot of plantings now, you want us to try to reduce that, we could do that. I'm sure we could. We could reduce the density of plantings in certain areas, increase the amount of sod if we wanted to. You know, obviously, this project was designed to cover the entire parkway, right? To
Right.
make everything flow into one another, you start more formal with the roundabout with a lot more sod. And then as you approach Kiowa, the amount of sod is diminishing, and we're showcasing more native plants.
Yeah, I guess I'm too, I mean, my sense is where most of the landscape is gonna be a problem is when those lanes get finished, we're gonna look at it and go, something's gotta go there.
Yes.
But there are gonna be open spots on both sides.
Sure.
And so we're all gonna agree we gotta spend money, and the only issue is gonna be whose money are we spending?
Right.
Then from that opening down to Cacique, there's really nothing to landscape there. You've got, you can clean it out a little bit on the one side, the other side has got the creek.
Right.
And then from Cacique to,
Right before the
60
bridge.
yards before the bridge, that area just doesn't look like there's a lot that needs to be done. We just have to cover your monstrosity of the bridge there.
Title station.
I know. I know.
Isn't it really, I think the question relates to, should area 2 be re-engineered a little bit, given these concerns? And some of the work, like cleaning out trees and so on, probably could go ahead because we don't need to plant it. It would make sense anyway. And then we don't know whether we're gonna get the rights to the land or any of that, or who's gonna pay for it. I'd do a little bit of quick re-engineering now, the next 30 days. Figure out what to do with 2, not necessarily have to come back here from a budget point of view, but come back and say, here's what we've figured out we could do with 2, which makes some sense, given what we know. And have it done in such a way that if we needed to add more plants a year from now, it would be fine. But it wouldn't make the whole project appear incomplete. I think when those lanes are put in, we're gonna be surprised by how little land we have to work with potentially. And B, if some of the things like opening up tree lines and so on can help, then we don't have the plant issue. So then you go to plants that we know we want for sure, let the rest go, and just re-engineer 2 a little bit. I think you could do it. I don't know how much you could save, but I'd certainly try to re-engineer it a little.
And I suppose I'm a little unclear as to what you would recommend, that we pause on this one for 30 days?
No, well, no. I'd have them start forward, but ask them to, on 2, come back with your, in other words, don't pause on the budget. Get that passed, get the 500 approved, but come back and say, what else could we do in 2 to A, save some money, and B, make a practical, let's call it reapplication, because I think if I look at the original plan, there are some things that could be done slightly differently to save some money.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we're a little bit up against the clock.
Mhm.
So in a perfect world, we would kind of have the go-ahead after, next council
Right.
meeting to start getting plants grown and move forward. Because if we're delayed another month, the timeline's gonna get tight.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with, you saying, okay, 500 or less. Obviously, the further below 500 we can get it, the better, especially in area 2. I'm confident that we can save some additional money there, but I can't tell you how much that
Right.
is now.
Understood.
But I can tell you that we will do our best to cut it as low as we can and not do work in that area that we don't think is needed, based on the feedback I'm getting here today.
Any other comments from any other members? Okay, well, I'll make mine. I can't support the 281 budget. If by next week, you can come back to town council and indicate that, we can do it for X amount of money, then I would be more supportive of voting that type of activity next week. But today, I'm gonna vote against authorizing the $281,000. I may lose that vote, but I'm uncomfortable with that number today. Anyone else with comments before we take a vote?
Yeah, just a question. Is this all irrespective of where the 281,000 comes from? Because I'm still wondering why the town is paying for landscaping of
The
areas
resort.
that are on the
Not
that
our
are
property.
not our property. The
Right.
resorts, well, they're not some Tom, Dick, or Harry, it's the resort's property, and if anyone should have an interest to make this look as pristine and as lush as possible, it's the resort. So what about, the alternative approach of saying, we think we're good for X of 281,000, name what the X is. We can work through that, or we can come up with a number. And Chris and Craig tell Warren, if you want the full Monty, you cough up the rest.
Well, I think the mayor's comment had to really do with county money as opposed to resort money per se. Is that, am I understanding that correct?
Well, I think what we're exploring is that, remember, the county had approved a $475,000 grant for the addition of the turn lanes. And, which we can't use for any other portions of the project, they have to be specific to that part of the project. So the question that I posed, as Stephanie is following up with, is if that, the actual cost comes in less than 475, let's say we come in at 400, is, will the county agree that, that additional, up to that additional $75,000 on the table could be used for landscaping related specifically to the area around the lands, because it's essentially part of
No,
the project. And so
I got that.
that's the question we're exploring.
And we're not exploring any contribution from the resort?
Well, I think that would be the next step. I'd like to get through that. If we can deal with it there, then that takes care of it. Most likely.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, one thing that I was just talking with Jim that we can provide for council next week, even today, we can go back to OSD for section 2 and ask them to pull out the landscape that they're proposing that's not on our property, so that we actually have two separate costs. So the 281, because we will need, in section 2, we will need money in there to go back with, even if it's just sod, we do need money, but I think what we need, and what you guys need to see is, what is the cost for the two? Because you may say, okay, for right now, we're going to approve work just on our property, which can come in, I'm just throwing out a number of 100,000. And then the other portion that's all on private property, we say right now, we're gonna set that aside until we can figure out, what we have left over from the project, because we're still working on it. If we have any overruns, like the mayor said, we may use up all of the money from the county. If not, I'm going to actually call, to say if there's anything left over, do we have the ability to be able to use some of that money on private property? But again, it goes back. So maybe if that's something that we can make sure we have for you all a week from today.
But has anyone asked the resort?
No.
I haven't had that discussion.
I don't think we're at that point.
Yeah.
We don't
We're
know-
not
we
at
don't
that
know
point?
what
You
we
want to
can
find
yet.
out what the county's going to do first. The county's potentially to set aside money.
Because that's what they're gonna want to know. If there's some money left over from that grant, then we can probably use some of
And
that.
prior to Tuesday's meeting to council, are we able to get an idea of what the cost would be in section 2 if we simply repaired and put back into what was the condition it was prior to construction? Meaning sod the entire way, the geo grid is all in place, and everything's cleaned up. Can we get that type of a number
I
as
can
well?
ask them for that type of number as well. I know some of the things that they're recommending now, when you talk about putting back in place what was taken out, is the number of trees. So it's not just sod. So the question is, if we wanna just have them do sod, in the irrigation line, we can certainly have them do that. But if we wanna go back and say, okay, also include, replacement of trees that we took out, not including our private, because we took out a lot of trees to
Okay.
that right
Yeah.
lane
But
there.
you're saying
Right.
simple replacement as opposed to enhancement
Right,
or additional
yeah,
trees?
yeah, we can have
That
that.
would be perfect.
Okay,
I
okay.
would like that.
Okay.
We still have a motion on the table that I believe we have to vote on unless someone would like to have any other comments. The motion is to approve a budget for section 2 up to 281,000 and some odd cents. Any additional comments on that?
Well, I guess I'm gonna explain my vote ahead of time, which is gonna be that I'm gonna vote against that.
Good.
Not because I don't think we need to spend money in section 2, but because I'm not thinking we have to go up to the 289, and that we will
couldn't agree more.
Well, then,
I'm comfortable
I have a
with
bit of a hard time voting on this one way or another because I'm not sure what the alternative is. So, I mean, I could just tag along and say, yeah, well, let's not spend the 289, but I'm not sure what we would then get. So can we maybe not vote on this until we know what we're looking at?
We can certainly withdraw the motion, or we can vote the motion down, and then we can have a discussion at next Tuesday's meeting with better information. Is that a reasonable position?
Will we have the county information by then?
Okay. Who made the motion? You did. Well, then I withdraw my motion,
Who was that?
and we'll simply have this discussion. We'll leave this issue open for 1 week. That really should not cause you any great discomfort for, yes?
I withdraw the motion then.
Klaus, you are withdrawing the motion?
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you. We have one section left, which is segment 1. And again, to reiterate, the position on segment 1 is the 4 fingers would be re-landscaped, some general cleanup within the circle itself, but no additional plants. Is that what has been discussed?
That's correct.
In order to get discussion going, can I have a motion to approve that position? Is there a second?
Second.
And I will open it up for a discussion, and I'm going to ask Councilwoman Conley if you'd like to make some comments.
Okay, first of all, as Jim has already stated, time is going by, and there is a concern, as far as I'm thinking, about plantings and having everything at a point where by the PGA, it'll look the way it's supposed to look. I feel that because the PGA is coming here next year, and it's going to bring a substantial amount of business to Kiowa and to Charleston, that the front area, the area people first see when they drive in, should be pristine and lush, to use terms we've heard before. I think there's shrubbery there. Something has to be done there. It's overgrown. It doesn't look good. I mean, it looks green and that's it. And I think the additional flowers and trees and some of the recommendations the company made in their first proposal would certainly add a lot of beauty to that area. And I guess the only thing I could ask is if we do end up taking money away from Section 2, if that could be added to this section to enhance the area, not just keep it the way it is, because I don't think it's adequate.
Dan, any comments you'd like to make?
Well, I'll go back to my original statement. I think Area 1 looks terrific at this point. Not perfect, but I don't find it unattractive at all, and I think it's consistent, or not perfectly consistent with where we are. I'd leave Area 1 alone, except for the 4 little islands that do need to be upgraded.
Any comments?
Well, with the caveat that I know as much about landscaping as I do about nuclear physics, and if you ask my wife what appreciation I have for gardens and yards, she'll just shake her head. But I will still say, you drive up to the roundabout, looks pretty good to me. It's not very scientific, but it looks pretty good. Because a fair amount of work has been done. It looks a lot better now than it did. I think it looks pretty good.
I mean, I think ever since it's been pointed out to us, the 4 little diamond areas. That's all you can look at now. Yeah, those clearly a little outdated,
They
don't
are.
sort of fit the plant material that we would, but inside the circle, I'm okay with it.
We do not really, do we have a segment of 141, but that's really not a true number on segment 1, because that was part of the 616. So do we really have a number on segment 1?
We will have to get them to separate that
Yeah.
number out as well for segment 1.
Okay.
Without, with, I guess, just the 4 islands,
Right.
and some cleanup of the roundabout.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh.
we were confident that we could do that with the approximately 30,000, 25 or 30 that we were gonna save from the path and get.
So you're not spending on
So,
section
yeah, so
one.
the motion
About
is really
30,000.
to do it as revised by you, although we don't have a drawing or an estimate on that, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Before I offer, or call the vote on that motion, I'm open to a discussion about savings on section 2 to deal with section 1. So we can have that discussion next week, but we can proceed with the motion we've got as of today, is that correct? Okay. Is there any other comments before we call a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Thank you, Jim. The last item on our agenda, the new business, is the budget.
Small item.
Dorota, do you want to talk about the budget?
Yeah, we talked about, we looked at the draft a couple of times, so today I just want to bring your attention to some changes that we've made since you've seen it last time. So as far as the revenues, Petra, I don't know, I'm working on, oh, thank you. Sorry, that's so bad, no, sorry. So, for the revenues, our original assumptions were that for the first and second quarter, we will collect 30% of what we've collected last year, and the third to fourth quarters are at 100%. After talking to management companies and their feedback, they feel pretty comfortable that we can change those assumptions to 50% in the first quarter and 75% in the second quarter.
That's good.
And I think it's fair to say they're getting more and more comfortable with those numbers as the weekend went
That's
on.
good.
That's
Very
correct.
good.
So based on changing those assumptions, we actually increased our revenues of about $584,000.
Wow.
Another big one that we already talked about as far as revenues is that we will not get the county accommodation taxes. So that's a decrease.
Yeah, if we, and I'm not gonna disagree with the more optimistic 75% case, but the only thing I would caution is I think there are a lot of questions about what's gonna happen at the end of the summer and the fall, because, you know, everybody's excited that the weekend was wild with rentals and people all over the place, but you unleashed a population of people who had not
Right.
been able to do anything and wanted to go somewhere. But what we've got outstanding at the end of the year, there are real issues about what the universities are gonna do, whether they're gonna start going back to school early, whether they're gonna eliminate the spring, the October breaks that they get. I think you got questions whether high schools and elementary schools are gonna start going back to school earlier in August than we did. So, I would be a little careful about being overly optimistic, because what we may find is that there's a lot of desire right now for people to go to hotels and rent and be tourists, but their ability to do that could get cut short in the fall, because all of a sudden you've got schools and universities trying to make up for the 4 months they missed here, and all of a sudden people are not able to travel if they wanted. So I don't think your numbers are necessarily wrong, but I wouldn't get overly
Well, those are
optimistic.
assumptions, yeah.
Yeah.
The
You
only-
know, the plan you hear most, I mean, I've spoken to a bunch of people who have connections, whether through the board or something else, to a whole variety of universities and colleges. And the plan you hear the most is the early start, early mid-August, no Thanksgiving break, no nothing, go right the way through in order to avoid as much of the cold season as possible. And that, of course, that would eat right into the, by a good month or more into the holiday time. Yeah,
It would eat into the October, we always see it in October.
October too, yeah.
And you'd see that go away.
Because, I mean, there'd be no breaks or anything like that. They're just going to power right through.
So, I think it looks optimistic, but there are still some things out there that could.
But just to mention too, that our best quarters are the fourth quarter and the first quarter of the year. So April through June, and then July through September. That's
And
where
I'm not
we.
debating your numbers, your
Oh,
assumptions.
no, I just wanna say, just for your information, you know that that's where the months, like our,
First
the
and
January
fourth.
to March, this is our always the lowest quarter to what we receive.
Okay.
But again, I mean, those are assumptions that we had to make some assumptions. So we went with some advice from, people that are in that business, and I'm sure they're helpful for that too, so those numbers look like that. Because of change in those assumptions, we also increase funding to the promotional fund, because this is 30% of the state accommodation tax, by it going up the funding to the promotional fund, which actually currently is CDB, that number increased. We also increased the total for the state accommodation tax applicants for 23,000. That's included in the number that you just approved. We have decreased, we asked Jim and Aaron to look at some projects if they can eliminate or put on hold for this year. So they came back and they actually decreased the project and research for $27,000. And we also took a same approach as reduction of 30% what we've done to other items for conservancy, just to be consistent, and there was a decrease for 14,000. As we just discussed, you discussed, we decreased the budget for the placeholder for the landscaping to 500,000, and we also decreased. We looked at historical irrigation cost, and what Jim's suggestion of changing this irrigation from the spray irrigation to the drip irrigation, we found another 15,000, so we balanced the budget.
On the comments that were made at the last Ways and Means Committee, we had asked for council members to provide communication to either Stephanie or I. From a standpoint of summary for everybody, because those were really kept between us, but there was no interest in really cutting back on the third shift police officer.
Good, thank you.
There was really, there was mixed emotion or mixed feelings about pay raises. I believe in this budget what we've installed is a $20,000 total of money for pay raises later in the year,
Yes.
but still no across-the-board pay raises. Is that correct?
That's correct. And also speaking about payroll, we got a note from Pga last week that they will not increase the retirement contributions. They were supposed to go up 1%, and so there is like $22,000 savings that is not reflected.
So we have a surplus of $22,000.
Yes.
One piece of housekeeping, I believe the $17,000 that we had put in for the insurance adjustment is all in the admin section, is that correct?
Correct.
So you'll see a little higher number in the admin section, but that's why.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else, Dorota?
No, I don't know if you feel, I know the mayor would feel good about that, then we look at, so as the consolidated budget is.
I'm waiting to see what it is.
As the consolidated budget is balanced, we can look at individual funds, that some of the funds actually have a deficit, while others have a surplus. So I just want to make sure that you all understand that this is how it's all presented. So if you look at your sheets, of course the county accommodation, we're not getting any money this year, yet we are spending the money for the projects that we usually fund from that fund, but we luckily have reserves, so we're going to pull from reserves for those projects. But main thing, our general fund shows a nice surplus, and that's the money that can be spent anywhere. There is no restrictions, so we can cover those projects even for restricted funds and really not pull from the reserve, but just move from one fund to another.
And the balance, the excess in the change of balance in the state accommodations is the $160,000 we had a previous discussion about
That's correct.
regarding the holdback.
Yeah, so, and we wanna keep it, well, we just wanted to cover this shortfall, so, from next year excess. So it's, and just another schedule, I know there was a lot of schedule to the budget, but that's also mayor's, suggestion, so he'll be even happier. This is, pretty much a different presentation of our spending. On the other, you see it by funds, you see it by departments. This one is more by the functions, how we operate as a town. And just to give you a different perspective, that the majority, 92% of our unrestricted funds are spent on the main functions, and only 8% go to other, which includes the biggest one is the. Why is it 32%? The charities, and from the restricted fund is kind of 42% is spent on other functions, and 50.
Where is that?
It's 3.2 is what, it's really 3%.
Yeah.
Oh, for wildlife.
So, like, this is not, sorry, I have to, but anyhow, so you'll see like there's a different presentation of our spending. Any questions?
The only thing I wanted to make sure everybody recognized, and I think at the council meetings the last 5 years have made the same comment every year when our constituents look at our budget and see that the town year after year appears to be rolling in cash, because we've had significant budget surpluses every year. And we've made the same, or I've made the same point every year that's been true, because we are largely an economy, our revenue stream is primarily economy based. Our monies come based on economic activity on the island. We don't have a property tax, but if business is good, then we're getting a lot of accommodation taxes, we're getting business licenses, we're getting building permits. But you live, what's the cliche, you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Mhm.
And the thing people needed to understand is that we built those reserves because at some point, all it took was a several year recession, or a huge natural disaster, and all of a sudden those funds were gone. So we needed to be, saving and reserving those funds in the good years. And so, what we see this year is now it's coming back.
Concentration.
And the reason we were saving these reserves is because now we've had an economic thaw. But people do need to realize that when we say we've got a balanced budget here, we're balanced in it largely, or to a large extent, because we are in fact at this point now drawing down reserves. And so, it's hard to do, even though I've said for 5 years that's why we've got it, we now all of a sudden can dip into those, which means a future town council next year or the year after or whatever may look at these actions and go, well, hey, they spent all that money, things were bad, they had a crisis, and they chose to spend those reserves down rather than cutting expenses. So I want to make sure that everybody recognizes that we are in this budget consciously choosing to pay for the things that we're doing by the fact that we're dipping into those reserves. I'm not suggesting we should, but it just needs to be explicit.
Well, the reserves were there for what I would consider an extraordinary event. We've just had one. We're in the middle of it. If we were expecting this to continue for several years, we'd have to change our spending. So, I hear you, Craig, but you're right.
And that's why she showed that other, where's the discretionary, non-discretionary What this had always tried to show were the things that we consider to be, some people consider to be the basic core functions of the town, and then things that were kind of nice to do if you could do them. So the Arts Council was a nice to do, the charity budget was a nice to do. And just to again point out that in this environment, we're still continuing and intending to continue to do those things which some people might argue in a bad economic time, we shouldn't be spending money on. Although I will say Arts Council's been cut down
Quite a bit.
probably less because it was intentional, more because you just simply can't run.
Can't have it.
In tourism, we really have to spend some of that money because some of it's state tax money. We're required to spend it, it's not all optional. Any other comments regarding the budget or questions for Dorota? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve or recommend to town council the approval of the fiscal year budget 2021?
I so moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, Dorota. Chairman's report, I have nothing more to add beyond my comments earlier today. Dorota, do you have a treasurer's
I just
report?
wanna let you know that, we received an FEMA reimbursement from Irma for $179,000. So that's a good sign.
So we lost roughly what? How much did the storm cost us in total then net?
Well, the cleanup itself cost only 110. However, we also, added the, remember when we had to do the, shoreline erosion because it was partially through the storm, so I don't know the full number, I don't know how much of that, but I can provide that for, the next meeting.
Okay.
Good.
Citizen comments, we'll have none. Committee members' comments. Mary Ann?
No, thank you.
I just want to commend the staff for, and you, Chris, for the work done on the budget. I think it's a good budget under the circumstances we're under, and I know a lot of work went into it, and I know we've got a few things more to solve, and we'll get them solved.
Nothing.
Mr. Mayor?
I will echo Dan's words.
With that, can I have,
You and the staff.
with that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.